I am Larry Yarbrough, the grayest member of the religion department. I just wanted to see if you were awake. Greatest? Oh, no, grayest. Grayest. Sorry, I'll have to speak more precisely. I am the grayest member of the religion department. I'd like to welcome you this afternoon to this contribution to the Charles P. Scott Lecture Series on Immigrant Religions in America. Before taking a moment to introduce our guest speaker this afternoon, I want to take a prior moment to ask you to help me acknowledge and thank Burke Rochford, our colleague in both the religion department and sociology anthropology, who put together this series of lectures. Anyone who's ever undertaken an enterprise like this is aware of how much work goes into it. Burke has in fact been working on this series of lectures for over a year now, and it has taken numerous hours of communicating both with the speakers and with all the people who work to make this possible, which means colleagues in both departments and students, the people here at the Rohatyn Center who help to make this kind of event possible, and all the other people here and in between. Unfortunately, Burke cannot be here today to hear me and you give him this thanks, but I've no doubt that he will watch this videotape very soon. Burke is home. He has been nursing a cold for the last week to 10 days and finally simply succumbed and had to go to bed. So Burke will be in our thoughts this afternoon, but before we go any further, would you please join me in absentia in thanking Burke for all that he did. The lecture series is sponsored by the Charles P. Scott Fund and administered through the Department of Religion, but there are an awful lot of people who have helped to do this, and I want to particularly mention the American Studies program, all 5 of the commons here at Middlebury, and also the people here at the Rohatyn Center for all the help that they provide in making this possible. There will be 2 more lectures in the series. There are posters around campus to remind you. The next one will be April 9th here in the Robert A. Jones Room, A Place at the Multicultural Table, the Development of an American Hinduism, and then on April 19th, the last in the series, is Islam, a Truly American Religion, with a question mark. Somehow I suspect I know the answer to what the question is. But we welcome you to come to both of those lectures in April. It gives me great pleasure to introduce today's lecturer, whom I had the opportunity of meeting this morning and having a long, fascinating conversation late morning and then through a lunch that went into the early afternoon. Fenggang Yang is a native of China, but now an American citizen. He is currently Associate Professor of Sociology and Anthropology at Purdue University, having served before at the University of Southern Maine, and before that teaching at various institutions in China. He holds a PhD and MA in Sociology from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., a degree in philosophy and a degree in politics and education from universities in China. He is the author of numerous articles and books, and has given lectures at numerous conferences. In addition to his writing and teaching at Purdue, he also, for the past 3 years, has been organizing and running and teaching in a program in China to teach people how to do the kind of sociological research he does, and that is sponsored by the Luce Foundation, the Henry Luce Foundation. So here is a person who works 12 months out of the year. He is the author of numerous books, both on China and also on Chinese Americans. His first book, Chinese Christians in America, Controversy and Assimilation and Adhesive Identities, appeared in 1999. Since then, there's been a steady series of edited and translated books dealing with various aspects of Asian and Asian Americans, and Asians and their association with various aspects of religion, particularly Christianity. He has also translated, interestingly, a very important book by Rodney Stark and Roger Fink, Acts of Faith, Explaining the Human Side of Religion, which has come to have a very significant role in the study of religion in China, as well as various other parts of the world. Professor Yang is here today to talk to us with another intriguing title, The Pluralism Project of Distortion. What do Asian Americans really believe? And for this question, I don't have an answer, and I look forward to the next hour to learn. Professor Yang.
Thank you, Professor Yarbrough, for your introduction. And also, I also want to thank Professor Rockford for inviting me to be part of this series. And more than a year ago, when Professor Rockford contacted me, I was reluctant at first because I have been doing more and more research on China, on things in China. You know, China is a massive country that can consume your whole life, or more than one life. But now, as I think back, I feel grateful for this opportunity, because after spending some years working on things in China, it's good to pull my mind back to think about things in the U.S. Of course, these are two of the greatest countries, and when you think about the issues, problems in one country, it's good to put in perspective when you also relate to things in the other country. So I am really grateful for this opportunity. And yeah, I'm a sociologist, and we talk about things based on facts, or supposed to be facts. And but today's talk, I haven't done this kind of talks in the U.S. I have done similar things, challenging things in China, perhaps. I feel more comfortable of doing that. But for this, this is perhaps one of the first attempts to tackle some big questions. When we think about immigration and American pluralism, certainly American pluralism has increased significantly since the 1960s. There are some internal reasons, internal factors. There are some external factors. But no matter what, this increasing diversity, increasing pluralism has significantly challenged our understanding about America, about who we are, about American identity. And as many scholars recognize that a major factor, perhaps the major factor of this change, is immigration. The post-1965 immigrants have brought a lot of different religions, cultures, and also they come from different continents, racially and ethnically different. These are the facts many people recognize. But there are some questions we still need to ask and ask again. The first one, even though when we talk about pluralism, many people assume they know what is pluralism and what they mean by that term. But really, what kind of pluralism are we facing? And also about immigrants. Who are the immigrants? This is closely related to the question about what kind of pluralism it is. And of course, demographers do a lot of this kind of research. They have very good data. But unfortunately, demographers do not talk about religion. And those who study religion are not very conscious of demography. So what are the immigrants in terms of religion? I think those are, even though simple questions, but important and basic questions. And I think, yeah, as the title implied, a lot of our perceptions about the present pluralism in America have been created, constructed by the Pluralism Project based at Harvard. And hope this will work. And as you can see, there's the website. Let me just bring this up. All right, this part of this, the front page, the home page of the Pluralism Project. And let me read the small font of this. It says, in the last 40 years, immigration has dramatically changed the religious landscape of the United States. Today, the encounter between people of different religious traditions takes place in our own cities and neighborhoods. In 1991, the Pluralism Project at Harvard University began a pioneering study of America's changing religious landscape. Through an expanding network of affiliates, we document the contours of our multi-religious society, explore new forms of interfaith engagement, and study the impact of religious diversity in civic life. In 2000, we expanded our study of pluralism to other multi-religious societies. I wish this could move, the pictures keep changing, all those colorful, exotic religious symbols that most Americans are not familiar with. And of course, there has been a series of products. There are CD-ROMs, there are featured TV programs, there are books, and there are manuals for instruction to teach this in high schools, reach out to communities. So the Pluralism Project has been very effective, very powerful. So that has affected the perceptions of today's pluralism in America. I think very few people would doubt that. And the major book is by Diana Eck, A New Religious America. And the subtitle is very important. It says, How a Christian Country has Become the World's Most Religiously Diverse Nation. And if we turn the page, we'll see the table of contents. It says, there are Hindus, there are Buddhists, there are Muslims. And this has become a multi-religious America. What does that mean? Yeah, we have this perception, increased religious pluralism in America. And this increased pluralism is de-Christianization of America. This used to be a Christian country, not anymore, or it's on the way becoming de-Christianized. But really, and the major factor of the pluralism are the post-1965 immigrants. But who are the immigrants? And what is the proportion coming from Asia? Hindus, Muslims, and Buddhists. Well, for those who study religion, you may be familiar with this world map of religions. And as you can see, North America, mostly Protestant, South America, Catholic, and the green area are the Muslim areas, Northern Africa, Western Asia, and Protestants in Northern Europe, Western Europe, Catholics in South and Eastern Europe, and really taking a magnifying glass and focusing on this area: Hindus, Buddhists, and Muslims. Well, here is the latest information about the foreign-born population in the U.S. And it shows that among the foreign-born, 53% come from Latin America, Christian countries. Only 25% of immigrants come from Asia. And it's too bad that the U.S. Census does not include a religion question. So we really don't know the religion of Americans. We can only do surveys and do estimates. And fortunately, since 2000, there have been several surveys, more reliable, using representative sampling. You know, that's the jargon. But that means if you just interview about 1,000 people or 2,000, you can get a good picture of overall population. And so here I will just present a couple of those that are relevant to our topic. And a major survey is called the Pilot National Asian American Political Survey. A group of political scientists got together and did a survey of Asian Americans. And they did surveys in 5 metropolitan areas: New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Hawaii, where a lot of Asian Americans live. And based on their survey, 22.3% are Catholic, 28.7% Protestants. So together, more than half of Asian Americans surveyed are Christian. And of course, there's a high proportion of those who have no religion, you know, those coming from Asia. In the U.S., the general population, the proportion of people who have no religion has been increasing in the last couple of decades. But that increase now, the highest number is like 14% or something. But here, among Asian Americans, that is a larger block. It's 20%. But if you happen to meet a person from Asia in the U.S., and if this person happened to be religious in any way, and how likely you meet a Hindu, Buddhist, or Muslim. If we take away those who have no religion, let's just take that off from the numbers. Oops, somehow. Why this is functioning weirdly. All right. Yeah, here is really all those Asian Americans who have a religious preference. 2 out of 3 are Christian. 2 out of 3 are Christian, either Protestant or Catholic. And only 1 out of 3 either Buddhist or other. Well, too bad those political scientists were not that interested in religion. So they had to include 1 or 2 religion questions. They didn't offer the answers. So the other religions means mostly Hindus and Muslims in this. So that's the real picture, the overall picture of Asian American religions. And how about those younger people, those children? Because very often the children is also an indicator of the future. If we look at children, Asian American young adults or those youth, there's a survey called Ad Health that's on high school, middle school students. There you'll see even bigger proportions of Christians among these Asian American kids. And we can also break this down to different ethnic groups. In the pilot study, the pilot National Asian American Political Survey, it included several major ethnic groups of Asians. And we can see this among the Chinese, about 25% claim to be Protestant, less than 4% Catholic, 23% Buddhist, and 48% no religion. Then you can see Koreans, over 70% are Protestant, 12% Catholic, only 5% Buddhist. Vietnamese, there are about half of Vietnamese in the US are Buddhists, but also a significant proportion of Protestants and Catholics, 14% and 21%. Then the Japanese, don't we all associate the Japanese with Zen? Well, we often have that Zen moment, right? This Buddhist connection. But the fact is that there are more Japanese American Christians than Japanese American Buddhists. So there are 39% Protestant, 6% Catholic, and only 25% Buddhists. Then the Filipinos, that's even more higher proportions, 70% Catholics and 19% Protestant. The really one difference that make a huge difference is those from South Asia, Indians and Pakistanis. There are 83% in the other category. Again, that's mostly Hindus and Muslims. Overall, as you can see, the majority of Asians, either we group them together or separately in different ethnic categories, we see the majority as Christian. So that's back to the question. Is the U.S. becoming de-Christianized? We get some other surveys. Tom Smith has been conducting this general social survey since the 1970s. Every 2 years, he would do another survey, interviewing 1,500 to 2,000 Americans, get an overall picture of Americans. And he wrote that that was the last survey that had a lot of religion questions. So the 1998 to 2000 general social surveys find that only 2.7% of American adults are followers of non-traditional religions. The traditional religions were the Judeo-Christian religions and the major ones, the traditional ones. And some of the Christian sects were put into the other category. And the others, the non-traditional ones, together, only 2.7%. And even among the other, only half of them are Buddhists, Hindus, or Muslims, including both immigrants and native-born Americans. So how many of those Hindus, Buddhists, and Muslims? Well, we always get some estimates from the different communities. It has become such a controversy about the number of Muslims in this country. The estimates vary so much. The higher and the lower estimates, there are several times different. But even if we take some liberal or generous estimates all together, you add Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists together, there are no more than 4% of American population. So we have some simple facts. The majority of Asians in the U.S. are Christian. And also among the Christians, there seems to be a block of East Asians versus South Asians. Those in Southeast Asian, it depends how do we do it, but most East Asians are Christian. East Asians and South Asians are distinctive in many ways. Here, it's so odd to be categorized as Asian when Asians have such distinct look, right? Those South Asians and East Asians. East Asians, yeah, those Koreans, Chinese, Japanese, or even including Vietnamese, look quite similar. But South Asians, you can tell. Actually, South Asians used to be classified as Caucasians up until the 1960s. But now they are Asians. And talking about not just the physical, the racial categorization, and this Harvard political scientist, Huntington, says there are several civilizations, the clash of civilizations, but he never put Indian civilization together with Chinese civilization. It's distinct, a different civilization. In terms of religion, as we have faculty members here who study South Asians, East Asians, religious orientations are dramatically different. And also it's interesting when we look at Asian Americans in the US, in that pilot survey, and there is a question about their political orientation, your own self-perception of your political orientation, liberal, moderate, or conservative. It is interesting to see that South Asians and East Asians are very different. East Asians tend to select conservative or moderate, and South Asians tend to select liberal. And even the East Asian Buddhists are not that different from East Asian Christians. They are more different from South Asians, the other category. And when you control ethnicity, then the religion makes a difference, not ethnicity. Well, of course, you may say, why does this matter? Yeah, it is not a whole picture of the pluralism project. It is a distorted picture, but why does that matter? Well, isn't that the Bible's teaching that love thy neighbor, right? That's when those Hindus, Muslims, and Buddhists move to your neighborhood. Welcome them, engage them. That's the great pluralism means. It's not just recognizing diversity, but also engaging those people of other religions. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that. But ignore thy brethren? It may not be a big problem for the mainstream, but I have had so much difficulties of doing research on Asian American religions. There are so many anecdotal incidences. Just a few years ago, I got a book grant to write about Chinese Christian churches. I had my first book on Chinese Christians, individuals, but I want to study the organization, Chinese churches in America. So I got that book grant from Louisville Institute. Louisville Institute is supported by the Lilly Endowment. And to my surprise, when all the grantees met that year, there were 70 projects. Only one project was on Asian American Christians, and that was my project. 1 out of 70. I asked, what's going on? Are there other Asians? Well, we are only interested in Christianity, not on others. But I said, yeah, but aren't there many proposals on Korean Christians, Chinese Christians, Vietnamese Catholics, Filipino Catholics? What's going on? Well, that's Asians. How can they be Christian? And later on, I and a friend approached Lilly Endowment directly. Says, can we do a survey of Asian American religions? Let's find out, what do they really believe? There are political scientists have done that, but they may not be reliable. We want to ask more questions. But this is Asian American religions? Yeah, that's interesting, but not in our priority of funding. And even more surprising, a few years ago when I was on the job market, I sent an application to a Christian university. I never heard anything back. A few years later, a star sociologist of religion came to tell me, do you know why they didn't hire you even though you have such a good record of publications? They thought, you're Chinese, you cannot be Christian. That's the reality. Why does that matter? I think that is a problem. And I think this pluralism project, the better it does, the more harm it could bring to Asian Americans, especially Asian American Christians. It is, moving beyond personal, anecdotal evidence. Think about those who wants to know about Asian Americans. Many would first think you are either Buddhist or Hindu or Muslim. It's rare for people first ask you, are you a Christian? It's really kind of keeping the immigrants exotic, stay that way. And forever alien. You're not part of us. Yeah, politically engage you in the civic life, but not the chapel. Don't come to my chapel. Or if you sneak in the back door, I'll put you out of the queue. And also, I don't know. These are speculations, more than what I usually do as a sociologist. But these anti-immigration sentiments in the last few years, of course, it have something to do with September 11th, 2001, and have a lot of other elements. But I'm afraid there is an element coming from this kind of pluralism project. So now let's try to speculate why there is a distortion. Why? Is that a methodological problem? We sociologists tend to do surveys. How about if you don't do surveys, you do field works? Or do ethnographies go to the communities and interview and survey, or ask? Well, I happen to have a few books that have been published by sociologists, anthropologists, religious studies. They are ethnographers. The first is edited by Stephen Werner and Judith Whitner. I happen to be part of that. It's gatherings in diaspora, religious communities and the new immigration. It's a very solid sociological or social scientific study. It includes Christians as major parts, Chinese Christians, Korean Christians, and some others. That was published in 1998. In 2000, another book published based on studies in Houston's immigrant religious congregations, edited by Helen Rose Ebel and Chaffetz. And that also included Korean Christians, Chinese Buddhists, Vietnamese Buddhists, so it's more balanced. I was also part of that. And then there's a book edited by Fenggang Min and Jung Kim. That's both of them, well, actually, Fenggang Min is a sociologist at CUNY, City University of New York. Religions in Asian America. That also quite balanced. Finally, a book co-edited by my friend Tony Carnes and me, Asian American Religions. Well, I make this bigger one is not shameless advertising. I have a point to make. Because this book, I got involved in selecting the cover. The first cover design they came up is this. Aren't you talking about Asian American religions? This would be the best to represent Asian American religions. What does that mean? Don't Buddhists, Hindus do this? So we protested strongly, since that's not the case. The majority of Asian Americans are Christian. This would offend many Asian Americans. So we insisted. Eventually, it turned to abstract. Yeah, there's some light coming from above. That's religious or spiritual. But that's really, fighting the stereotypes is difficult. The stereotypes coming from the public, from the media, now it has been reinforced by academia, by those scholars. So it's not methodological problem. Those doing ethnography could present you a balanced picture, but they are not heard. They are not that well known. They are not that influential. Well, is it a disciplinary problem? Sociologists are different from those religious studies. I don't know. I wouldn't move into that direction to criticize other disciplines. I doubt, because the people in our book, Tony Carnes and Fenggang Young's edited book, have people of other religion, of other disciplines. Gatherings in diaspora included people of different disciplines. So it's not the disciplinary problem. I would not think so. But then there is a question, is it an ideological problem? What would that be? Would that be liberal racism? I do not want to go into that direction. Now, to be more sociological. You may ask this question, why most Asians in America are Christian? If Asia mostly are non-Christian. Well, to give you some good reasons, first it comes from selective immigration. Who would want to come to the U.S.? Well, those Christians tend to be more likely than non-Christians immigrate to the U.S. This is very clear for Koreans because it has been very well documented. In Korea, there are about a quarter of South Koreans Christian, 20 to 25%. But before they leave, there was a survey about those who are about moving to the U.S. and surveyed them. About half of them are Christian. That is, half of immigrants from Korea are Christian already before coming to the U.S. There's higher tendency for Korean Christians to move to the U.S. And the half of non-Christians, once they got to the U.S., half of them would join a Christian church. As a result, about 75% of Koreans in the U.S. attend Christian churches. For the Chinese, it's not clear because there hasn't been empirical studies, but there may be a tendency that those in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, who happen to be Christian are more likely to come to this country than non-Christians. So selective immigration is a factor. Then after they come, many convert. I studied Chinese Christians in the U.S. In most Chinese churches in the U.S., now there are maybe about 1,000 churches. Most of the churches are full of converts, adult converts. Between 1/3 to 2/3 of church members are adult converts from non-Christian background. And most of them converted in the U.S. and half of non-Christian Koreans convert to Christianity, and many Chinese convert to Christianity. So the conversion of those Asian immigrants, that's another big factor. So last year, I edited a special issue for the Sociology of Religion Quarterly, focusing on this conversion theme. In the past, immigrants bring their old religion. That has been the pattern. Those happened to most of European immigrants. But now there's something new. Immigrants give up their old religions and accept new religions. That hasn't been studied very well so far. So I think that really deserves greater attention. Then, of course, there are also the second and third generation assimilation. When the Chinese first came to this country in the 19th century, 1840s, 50s, up to 1882, when there was the Chinese Exclusion Act, when the Chinese immigration was cut off, there were very few second generation or third generation Chinese. When the Chinese first came, those were mostly laborers, those doing, mining or laundry, hand laundry, and those things. They built a lot of temples, those Chinese traditional temples. But those temples, there were hundreds on the West Coast. But by the turn of the century, 1900, only 2 of them were functioning as a religious site. All the others are gone. So it was the first generation phenomena of keeping those old religions. By the second, third generation, most of them grew up in a church, in a Christian church. And even though it has not been documented, but that happened to the Chinese, happened to the Japanese, and I think also happened to Koreans, the early immigrants. Then, of course, we also need to ask, what kind of Christians are they? Well, many of them have their immigrant church or ethnic church. They have their ethnic language. Korean churches preach in Korean. Chinese churches preach mostly in Chinese. Gradually adopt English, so it becomes bilingual. And many often, at least among the Chinese churches that I have studied, many of them become trilingual. Because the Chinese is, they are not one language, even not one race. There are multiple dialects that you cannot understand each other. So there are, in a church, when they have a church here, they have to offer service in Mandarin Chinese, Cantonese Chinese, and even Taiwanese Chinese, plus English. Some of them are in denominations, but more than majority of Chinese, more than 50% of Chinese Christian churches in the U.S. are non-denominational. They do not want to join a denomination. For those who do join, they tend to join those congregational type. Those more independent, Baptists. You affiliate, but you have the autonomy. Koreans, many of them are Presbyterians, but after they came, they figure out, even though they were the spiritual children of Presbyterian missionaries, but here it's hard to work with those Presbyterians in PC USA, the Presbyterian Church of USA. As a result, they try to join the PCA, the Presbyterian Church of America. But there are still some issues. Eventually, there is a sizable independent denomination called the Korean Presbyterian Church of America. In the last decade or so, there's an emergence of Pan-Asian American churches. Many people get fed up with those ethnic churches. Why do you have to speak Chinese? Why do you have to speak Korean? We are Christian. We are American. Why don't we get rid of those ethnic languages? Well, they try. They go to other churches. Many of them bounced back. Says, you're not one of us. It's better for Asians that we share some look or some culture gathered together. So that's important reason for the rise of Pan-Asian American churches. Actually, Pan-Asian American churches are mostly Pan-East Asian. There are a few South Asians who are Christians who join, but mostly East Asian Americans and some Caucasians. Of course, denominations do not make that much sense to these East Asian Christians. And Robert Watno already, written about this in the 80s. There is a decline of denominationalism. So that's one thing no time to elaborate. And then the other thing is, it's interesting to think about this. Now I'm not moving into the political dimension, but let's try to move in the theological dimension. Is there an affinity between evangelical evangelical Christianity, and Confucianism? When you think about East Asians, what they are? Perhaps Confucian culture is a significant element in their identity. That's how I see it. When I studied Chinese Christians, because in the subtitle it's about identities, I did think about this issue about identities, cultural identities. The Chinese traditional culture or religion are these major three: Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. The cultural identity. And what I found is that the Chinese in the U.S. at the Christian church, they go through a process of identity reconstruction. It's really deconstruction of their Chineseness. What does that mean to be Chinese? If you do not speak Chinese, is that Chinese? If you intermarry the children, are the children still Chinese? So I see there are three types of Chineseness. Some biological, even if you do not speak Chinese, even if you do not like Chinese food, as long as your parents are Chinese, you're still Chinese. That's really the primordial, by blood type. Then there are political identity. If you're Chinese, you must love China. You must sacrifice for China. You must, show that, visit China. And then the other says, I don't like the PRC, the People's Republic. I don't like the Republic of China. Well, actually, many came from Hong Kong. They were the subject of Britain. So political loyalty to each of the entities was not possible. So they are Chinese, strong. That Chinese mostly cultural. But the cultural identity faced some serious challenges. When Vietnamese refugees came, the church that I studied sponsored some refugees out. Says, we got to set up some priorities. What kind of refugees we sponsor? They said, let's sponsor some Chinese out of those Vietnamese refugee camps. But how do you tell who is Chinese? Because anyone can claim to be Chinese. They look Chinese. So they set up a priority, and as a standard says, as long as that person speaks some Chinese dialect. So that's what they did in the early 70s. By the late 1970s, many of their own children do not speak Chinese anymore. Then the parents got to think, are these children Chinese anymore? So, that's a very painful struggle. But eventually, I found that the Chinese church, the Chinese Christian church, really pushing out the political identity and also pull in the primordial identity, emphasizing the cultural identity. So being Chinese is not by ethnicity, not by race, but by culture. But what culture? China, with 5,000 years of history, there are different dialects. Which dialect is more Chinese? There are different rituals, symbols. What are the more Chinese ones? And then there are those philosophical theological level of systems. Looking at this, I do, simply put, most of the Chinese Christians in America tend to be Confucian in orientation. They celebrate Chinese cultural festivals, but reject some of the traditional symbols, like the dragon. The Chinese, some claim to be, the descendants of the dragon. The dragon in the Bible, you tell. And so, okay, we will not adopt those symbols, but cultural festival, Spring Festival, the New Year is fine. It's not religious. Of course, it's very complicated. Individuals identify differently. There are different combinations. I will not go into that. But here is the question. Those Chinese Christians struggle. What does that mean to be Chinese? It's not ethnic. It's not race. It's culture. But what culture? Well, if you really think deeply, it really comes down to this. Do you mean becoming Confucian Christian, becoming Taoist Christian, becoming Buddhist Christian? Are they the same Christians who try to think philosophically using Platonic terms, Aristotle terms? Maybe not. So that's the struggle. All right, so I think I have said enough about the challenge and the possibilities. I think it's, all right. It's several layers of identity conflict, but what would be the future? What's the meaning of pluralism? So back to my title of the presentation, the pluralism project of Distortion. I think the problem with that is emphasis on religious pluralism, pluralism of different religions. But I see the real challenge, perhaps, is cultural pluralism within Christianity. These Asian Christians are bringing different cultures into the Christian church. And they should not be ignored and should figure out how to live with those European American Christians, or the vice versa. The European American Christians need to learn how to live with those Asian American Christians who have different approach, different understanding of the Bible and of politics and all other things. Thank you.
I suspect there are one or two questions and comments from the floor. And Professor Young has plenty of experience at this, so I'm simply going to turn the question and answers over to you, and you can call as you will. Please. One at the back start.
So do you think that Christianity as a religion has the potential to supersede cultural differences and decrease discrimination between Caucasian Americans and Asian Americans?
I haven't studied the other side of this. I have studied the Chinese side. Actually, I glossed this over as this picture when I studied the Chinese side. Definitely, there's a clear emphasis, they strongly affirm, well, that's one version of Americanism. One version of American identity is the Christian foundation, and people believed. So they identify this strongly with this. And many say, yeah, we have different look, we have different cultures, and actually we shouldn't really hold on to these secular identities that much, because this world is not my home, it's not our home. Our home is the heaven, is the kingdom of God. The Christian identity impose and supersede their ethnic identities. But what's going on with the mainstream Caucasian, white, and black Americans, that's another side. And I think, of course, the pluralism project, unless it's changed, unless it also includes those immigrant Christians, then the situation is not optimistic for me. Thank you. All right.
As a member of a very small religious cultural minority in America, could you say more about your understanding of the relationship of Christian to American? At times I almost felt as if you were using them synonymously.
Right. I know this is a very complicated issue, and what I can say from a sociological perspective, there are people who perceive this country as having a Christian foundation. But that's one of the contested American identities. Yeah.
I'd like to follow up on the question from the rear about the potential of Christian identity, of Christian inclusion, because it seemed to me that the first part of your lecture gave us a very strong example of Christian exclusion, and that you had really answered the question from which you backed away when you asked whether this is liberal racism, because it seems to me that you were describing a pluralism project which is not pluralistic in as much as it excludes or has a preconception and misperception of Christianity that excludes Asian Americans. So it seems to me you anticipated your question, you answered your question, and I'd like to know whether that is in fact your view.
Well, I think that's a big question for all of us to think about, to think through. Because of the last few years, I spent more time on China than the U.S. I haven't really thought through, so I put question marks instead of periods. It's not a statement. I just wonder whether that could explain it. I used to teach this class on race and ethnicity in the U.S., but I haven't really taught that for 5 years, so I haven't really put my mind into it. So that's why I invite you, all of us, to think about that.
I think, first of all, thank you very much for your presentation, and I learned a lot from it, and I wish I had seen it, 10 years ago or whatever when the Pluralism Project was launching. The comment I have, and then a question to follow, well, I'll give you the question first, and then the comment. How about? The question is, have you presented this material to the Pluralism Project and gotten any kind of response? Because I think it would be interesting to see how they would respond. My own feeling as someone who was involved in the project early on, as a graduate student, and therefore not controlling the agenda, is that I see your point, but I think that the Pluralism Project was asking very different kinds of questions than you are, and I don't see why your kinds of projects and the Pluralism Project itself can't stand side by side and communicate with one another. In other words, that I'm not sure you have to slay the dragon of the Pluralism Project, as it were, in order to make your case. And what I think the Pluralism Project was doing wasn't asking a demographic question at all. It wasn't saying what's going on demographically with Asian Americans in this country. It was saying, really, I think Diana was saying, I see Hindus, Buddhists, and Muslims in my classroom in a way that I didn't see them 30 years before, 40 years before. Something has changed in America, and what has changed is the religious makeup. And it may not be a dramatic demographic change, but it's an interesting religious change. So I think she was starting with religions, not with ethnicity. She was starting where she knows what she does best, which is Hinduism, then expanding it and saying, okay, I see Hindu Americans, I see Buddhist Americans, I see Muslim Americans, and how does that change what America looks like and feels like? And I don't really have a problem, and maybe it's because I'm one of her students and I have a bias, but I don't have a problem with those kinds of questions. I think they're different questions than what you're asking, and I think what you set out is a wonderful agenda for how research might continue to go. But I see these as being able to exist side by side, really.
Of course, any research projects are limited. You have to set up a very limited goal to accomplish. I think Diana Eck has accomplished her goal wonderfully, marvelously. But the more she accomplishes, I'm afraid the more harm it brings to those Asian American Christians. You know, I really wonder whether she has had any graduate students who happen to be Asian American Christian, because all the newspaper reports that in the Ivy League universities, one of the most active student groups are evangelical Asian Americans. And in the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, in the Campus Crusade, up to a quarter of the active members are Asian Americans. So this is true to MIT, it's true to Harvard, those Boston schools. So don't they have ever asked the question, says, why not you also include us in this? I don't know. But the effect of the Pluralism Project, you can feel it anywhere, everywhere. My colleagues, Steve Werner has been talking about this. He said, this country is not becoming de-Christianized. It is de-Europeanization of American Christianity. But his voice, where do you hear that? In Christian Sanctuary, he published an article, but nobody hear about that. But anywhere you go to a conference, when you talk about Asian American religions, then you must be studying those Hindus, Buddhists, or Muslims. So the effect you can feel everywhere, and it has affected the Lilly endowment. They said, why we want to study Christians. Why would we waste money on those Asian American religions? So I'm talking about the effect, not the intentions. That's why I just...
the unintended consequences.
Right. Back there first.
I just had a question about, you were talking about the Pan-Asian churches, and I was wondering if that was kind of like becoming a growing trend, if that was something that Asian Americans are moving towards, or if that's kind of a minority of a minority.
On West Coast, you will see more of them. And there are a few in New York, I think one or two in the Washington, D.C. area, a couple of them in the Houston area. It's kind of trendy for those yuppies, those young, especially for those who work in Silicon Valley, those geeks. They find their parents' congregations are not interesting anymore, and they think their parents are not Christian because they insist on speaking Korean, Chinese, or other Asian languages. To be Christian is to be American, to go beyond your ethnicity. And many of them are idealists. They try to blend in with non-ethnic American churches. But many of them, after a few years, realized, you got to do something to more of your own. So that's why the number of Pan-Asian American churches is rising in the last decade or so, especially on the coastal areas. But long term, I've been arguing with my colleague friend Russell John. His dissertation was on Pan-Asian American churches coming from Japanese and Chinese churches. Used to be Japanese or Chinese, but now it's Pan-Asian. I argue that I said Pan-Asian American churches cannot hold. It's really a step toward multi-ethnic, multi-racial. Because it's not like Latin Americans, you have greater commonalities to hold on to of that identity. But the Asian Americans, many of them are critical of Confucianism. Actually, I see that perhaps is a direction to go to in order to hold on to some distinctive identity. But I'm not a theologian, I'm not a church leader, so that's not the direction I'm going. But I see that it's really a way station toward total assimilation.
Final question, I think, if we may, from Professor Asieri.
Yes.
I was intrigued by the point you made about the Presbyterians among Korean Americans. said that most of them came out of missionary churches. My question is, how do they see themselves as Christians here in relation to those churches that sent the missionaries to them?
I haven't done studies at Korean churches personally. For those Chinese churches that I studied, they are sincerely grateful to those missionaries. They try, all ways to show their appreciation. But also they often make comments about the current churches that, their grandparents or their parents send their missionaries out. Now these churches become so liberal, morally, not so much on politics, but morally and theologically. They are moving away from the truth. And so there's some ambiguity, ambivalence. Yes.
Hi, I'm sure we can stay around a few moments for those of you who would like to stay a bit longer and ask quiet questions. Welcome to do that. But please join me in thanking Professor Yang for his presentation.
Thank you very much.
Next lecture, Monday, April 9th, A Place at the Multicultural Table, The Development of American Hinduism. Thank you for coming.